In almost every case when I've been out fundraising, it's been with people that I've built relationships with. This is a relationship business. And you need to, even if you don't know any of the investors that you are looking to raise money, you need to identify those investors that you think are going to be most suited. For me, what that always meant was having operators that had been built, either built businesses or had been in the market. All of our initial investors, including York IE, were just incredible operators. So we wanted that talent around us. So we really searched out for people that could give us, the right advice, who have been in the trenches and seen all the hard things as you're going through, raising that capital, but also then deploying that and building your business. Nothing is ever easy here, right? It's how do you really start to drive this? So for me, it was, how do I identify people who have done the things that I want to go do? How do I get those people around me? How do I make sure I have a plan of attack and build a pitch deck that is going to resonate and answer those questions that they're going to have, and try to get ahead of those questions so that, you're not sitting there trying to make these things up on the fly. You really thought out what that plan needs to look like and really be able to show an investor not only the future of what this is going to look like, especially if you're a technology business, you're there to change something that's not right? You want to change this, make it better. You want to be able to show that vision, and you want somebody to come along on that ride. When we were prepping for this, it's very much like you go from dating to marriage very quickly, right? So you want to make sure that you're with those right people. And I think building these relationships early, even for people that aren't necessarily going to say yes today, so that over time they know who you are and they're there. I mean, I've known Joe as a good example for a very long time. And when we were incubating, I got the opportunity to talk to him, get his advice, even though, he didn't come in until we did our SAFE and then into the Series A. I knew that, he knew what our business was about, how we thought about these things, got his advice around how we should build, and then made sure that we integrated that advice well into how we were pitching. So those would be a couple of things that I think we've seen. And Kristen, I know you've got a tremendous background in thinking about this from a structural perspective as well.
Awesome. So, building on some of the things that Jonathan just touched on, sometimes I think about it in terms of 3 phases. There's the phase like before you're really even kicking things into high gear. There's the phase as you are preparing to start scheduling meetings, and then there's the phase where you're actually in meetings. So let's talk about even before you're building out your fundraising strategy. I think that is the moment in time when you want to make sure that you have your foundation and your fundamentals on lockdown. And there are a few pieces that go into that. So, right now, and Joe, please chime in on this, but right now, every investor I'm talking to needs to see metrics. They ideally want to see traction metrics. But if you are pre-product, pre-revenue, even just kind of momentum metrics that show that momentum. So sort of best case scenario would be revenue generated, and ideally repeatable revenue, i.e. are you capable of building a repeatable sales process that can scale if you have more capital to scale? If you are pre-revenue, there are still some great indicators of momentum that can stand in instead of those revenue metrics. So LOIs, or maybe even a wait list or a newsletter list that you have, anything that sort of indicates you have done, you've built a foundation that puts you on the right footing to start generating revenue once you are ready. Within that first phase, I think that there's an external component to that preparation as well, which is building, and I know that Joe and Jonathan, both of you talked about this, cultivating those investor relationships. In the ideal world, you are building relationships with great investors long before you are ever starting to think about asking for a check, because you want to get a feel for who might be a good fit for you, who could be a good advisor, an advocate. And they want to get a good feel for whether you're someone they want to place a bet on. So building that relationship early, in as pure a context as possible, where you are not asking for something and you're not navigating the sort of power dynamic associated with that, that is the right time. Then thinking about phase 2 is sort of the next piece of preparation. And this is almost like preparing for due diligence. And I know it might sound funny for me to talk about due diligence, which is generally kind of the last step before you get a check. But you don't want to do your due diligence when an investor asks to see your data room. Like, that is too late. You want to make sure that you have everything buttoned up, a squeaky clean data room, so that if and when an investor asks to see your data room, you can say yes and share that with them immediately. Therefore, it's it's important to think about building out your data room and getting everything shipshape before you have those investor conversations. For what it's worth, we have a great checklist of really like everything that you should think about for your data room, the sort of need to haves as well as the nice to haves. So that might be a good starting point if you are thinking about fundraising soon. Just make sure that all of that is ready to go. And then the third phase, the sort of final phase, if you will, of actually going into your investor conversations. At this moment in time, like most of the founders that I work with, and I work with, I mean, I probably have dozens of founder conversations every single week across all industries. And really across all industries, people are having about 50 to 100 qualified investors at the top of their funnel in hopes of getting one lead investor to come on. So you really want to be thinking about that funnel in a big way, and thinking about your top of funnel in that realm of 50 to 100 people. Ideally, you are having as many of those conversations in close succession as possible. You want to be able to iterate and learn as quickly as you can. It sort of pains me when I hear about founders who are like, oh, I have one investor meeting this week and then one the next week and then one the next week. I mean, you can do the math on that. If you have 100 people, like that will take you almost 2 years. And as Joe pointed out, fundraising really can be a full-time job. So you don't want it to take 2 years. Instead, if you can aggregate as many conversations in as short a period of time as possible, that will allow you to learn rapidly, to iterate, to refine. And then, like, as you start getting into final conversations, like maybe you have 2 potential lead investors, and then you can start negotiating on term sheets in a different type of manner than if you only had one. So those are sort of the 3 phases, and the types of things that I see among the best founders who ended up finding success in fundraising and sort of how they approach things.
Great point. And we recently had a portfolio company go on to sign a term sheet to raise a Series A, and they ran an incredible process, very tight. So they did have 104 investor conversations or investors on the list. They spent about 6 months sort of doing those exploratory calls, right? The classic, if you ask for an investment, you're going to get advice. If you ask for advice, maybe you'll get an investment. But so they spent 6 months learning what metrics, what was required, for them to have a successful fundraise. Then we tightened up the list. And over the next 30 to 45 days, they kicked off those conversations and said, hi, we're in process. Here's what we're looking to raise. Here's the pitch deck. If you would like access to the level 1 data room, let me know. Open it up to the series of investors, then the level 2 data room, which had more information around customers and pipeline and momentum, et cetera, et cetera. And then it was, that led to post that 45-day period, all of a sudden they had 3 verbal offers, 5 written term sheets, and they were off to the races of negotiating and hopefully be closing here shortly. So I do think the sequencing and running a tight process, for one, it's a huge challenge because you still need to run the day-to-day. But if you can balance that appropriately and be very succinct in your outreach and again, sharing the same types of information at the same sequence with the same folks, is absolutely key.